joining. So let's kick off. So I guess the first thing to say is welcome to the first of these webinars that the Institute of Asset Management Ireland chapter are running. It feels like some of you will know the IAM Ireland chapter as an organisation, but it feels right to do a bit of an introduction to us. So we're a relatively new chapter within the Institute of Asset Management. There's been a lot of work over the last couple of years in setting up ourselves as a chapter, and we're broadly structured around hubs in Dublin, Munster, and up in Northern Ireland. And I guess we've got representation across the panel from people in each of those areas. So that's really good to see. From ourselves on the committee, there are three of us involved in running today's session. So we've got Randall Gilbert from NIE Networks, who you'll hear from later on in terms of a presentation. We've got Orla Mayer from EY, who needs special thanks to actually making this event happen, and then myself, Matthew King from KPMG. So I guess like most organisations, the IAM itself has been affected by COVID-19, and that in a former world we were planning on having our first inaugural face-to-face conference this summer, but obviously, like all of us, we've been affected by the events, and we've had to rethink essentially what we do as an institute in terms of how we engage with the community. So that really, I guess, gave rise to this event in terms of how we're going to go forward. So we've got some ideas for future events following this, but we'll talk to you at the end of the session about what those might be, because really we would like to get everyone's views of what those topics could be. Before I get too much further, I should say we're recording this event, so we'll make it available through the IAM website if we can do that, and we've also got a LinkedIn channel there for people who want to get in touch with us. So in terms of the structure for today, Randall is going to kick things off with a presentation from NIE, and then we're going to have a panel facilitated panel discussion with our panel members. So Randall's going to be joined by Tom Brown from ESB and Carl McCarthy from GNI. We're going to run some live polls during that session, and we'll be using the chat for questions, and Orla is going to facilitate that session. And then we'll do a wrap up at the end, and we'll talk about how you might get in touch with us, and what particularly if you've got ideas for future events. So I guess without any further delay, it feels right to pass over to Randall, who's going to kick things off with a presentation on how COVID has affected NIE Networks.
Thank you, Matthew. I think if I just load the presentation here, if you give me 1 second. Okay. Okay, could somebody just confirm that that's on screen?
That's perfect, Randall.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good morning, everybody. Listen, I suppose the topic of this morning's webinar is really impacts on sort of infrastructure and asset management type organisations. We've probably all had some impacts in relation to business as usual operations. So like this is just a sort of try to stimulate the debate on some of the questions and panel debate later on, but it's just a sort of a snapshot of some of the impacts that we have experienced in NIE Networks and some of the mitigations, etc. we've taken. So hopefully it's just an example, and it's something there that hopefully stimulates something later on in the webinar. So I'm just going to start with get the next slide. The sort of areas I'd like to just sort of covered in this are things like the sort of a bit of context in terms of the COVID impact, the impacts in terms of operation and our business continuity, some governance, financial, something around employees, the health and safety, and protecting the customers, and then I just want to finish off with a bit around green recovery, which is gathering a bit of pace and momentum externally. So hopefully that's clear. You can see those graphs. I mean, the left-hand graph is really just that's information that has come from, you know, the Department of Health in Northern Ireland. It's just a track of the number of positive cases on a daily basis. That's the blue bars, the cumulative in the red line. What I was tracking against here was the green line, which was effectively our staff unavailability. You know, one of the impacts of COVID, you know, apart from the movement and restrictions that are in place around government, you know, we have also had people who've had to self-isolate either because they've had symptoms or because members of their family have had symptoms and they need to self-isolate. So we've had, you know, an impact on staff availability, you know, throughout the period. And you know, it was interesting to see that, you know, there was a good sort of correlation really between our unavailability rate and also the blue bars, which are actually the positive tests on a daily basis, you know, that were confirmed within Northern Ireland. Not that there's any direct linkage, but it was just interesting that there was a bit of a correlation there, you know, which might be of use, you know, for any future type of events, you know, try to predict. The right-hand graph, you know, it comes into probably one of the questions that is coming on later on, but the impact on electricity demand. Obviously, with businesses, you know, effectively closing down for a number of months, you know, that business load has dropped off. There's maybe been a slight increase in terms of domestic load, but the net impact, the dotted line that is in there was 2019 is the second one down. The one beneath that is the 2020 equivalent. So you can see that, you know, between, you know, there's approximately, in terms of around about a 15% reduction in electricity demand, you know, over the periods are 16.6 in April and 14.8 in May. You know, so that's been sort of an impact in terms of the consumption, you know, within Northern Ireland. And I'll come on to some of the impact for us on that, you know, later on. From an operational and business perspective, then, you know, obviously, you know, being on the network, I mean, the majority of our workforce are out working on the ground, on the lines, cables, substations, etc. You know, to keep the network assets fit for purpose. You know, the health and safety has been paramount, and everything we've done in relation to our plans has taken that into consideration. We had to look at an essential works programme effectively because of a combination of staff unavailability and the social distancing that we had to be employed, especially in public space, and even in private dwellings, because a lot of our work is within premises as well. We had to look at what was called an essential works programme and agree this, you know, through our unions. So for a period there, 30th of March to the 1st of May, we were in an essential works programme, which was roughly 25% of the work we would have normally done, you know, on the network, you know, pre-pandemic. There were approximately 430 staff with no or limited work at that point in time, but we did, I'll come on to what we did there with that position. That has slowly increased. 1st of May we went up to 50%, and then from 1st of June there we went, you know, increased again. And again, this has all been done taking the government guidelines into consideration, you know, in terms of how we try to get back to normal levels of work on the network. So in terms of, you know, how that affected the programs, you know, the essential works, we weren't quite a fault and emergency organisation. We didn't have to go that far, but what we were able to do was obviously fault and emergency was our primary, you know, top of the list in terms of being able to maintain services, fixing faults and responding to any you know, storm or you know, poor weather escalations. But we were able to keep up, you know, work in relation to our transmission lines and substations, distribution primary subs, and our distribution line and cable network. But it was primarily, you know, patrolling, inspections, maintenance type work, and urgent remedial work, so fixing defects, you know, and anything that required, you know, urgent treatment. So, you know, and tree cutting programs, anything that was really related to safety, rather than potentially a resilience cut. We've got two types of cut: one looking at safety, and that's keeping clearances from overhead lines, and the other is resilience, which is really trying to protect the network from bad weather. So in substations as well, like planned maintenance is seen as essential. You know, we can't, you know, renege on our maintenance duties, otherwise we start getting into backlogs and getting overdues, and that's not a good position to be in from an asset perspective. So all planned maintenance was still, you know, continued to be carried out. Fortunately for us, you know, most of that maintenance is within our own property. It's within our own substations, etc., and we can, by applying the right procedures, we were able to work safely and continue with that work. Connections obviously dropped off. Obviously as people got into lockdown, we didn't see the same number of connections coming through. But in terms of connections work, it was basically all halted anyway, apart from critical connections, and that's things like any requests from utilities, hospitals, care homes, etc. We obviously responded to those. And with metering, there was only sort of limited works in relation to reconnections and faults. So the non-essential stuff, things that we actually halted, were things like most of our capital projects, capital lines, cables programs, and substation programs, including the likes of our cyclic, tree cutting programs that were sort of non-safety related. All non-critical customer work was halted as well. So, but we did see that drop off quite significantly, during the early stages. And I'll say all major transmission substation works, primary substation works, anything in terms of asset replacement, non-urgent asset replacement, and any sort of development work in terms of reinforcement work was all halted. And in terms of meter activities, all effectively, bar critical meter activities were halted, including meter reads. We're probably slightly different from GB. That NIE Networks does all the meter reading, which is 880,000 customers 4 times a year, but that was all halted, during the pandemic. So with such a reduction in program, obviously we had to get into a rostering situation initially with staff. We didn't furlough anybody. We did a combination of actually running a roster, and then we also had an alternative works program. So this was things like stuff that would have probably been on a nice to do list. We have a big program at the minute in terms of asset records, and although we now have a new sort of initiative running in the organisation in terms of how it's job log done effectively. It's in sort of so once the job is complete, you have to log it, and only when you log it and collect all your records and update the relevant systems is the job actually done. But there is a historic backlog of checks and balances we need to do in some of our asset systems, and we've got a whole thrust in terms of data and data quality and data completeness. So we were able to put quite a significant number of folk onto some of that retrospective work in terms of doing the quality type work around our asset records. So that's been a benefit out of this as well. So we have a range, quite a range of alternative works where we can divert other staff on to ensure that they're actively engaged, during the working day. There was a number of things done for staff, obviously, and advice. We obviously, some of our work activities we can't do with a 2 meter separation just because of the way teams work in the confined spaces at times. So we sort of issued a guidance on that for staff when those occasions arise during their work. And along with that, we introduced a thing called a dedicated observer. So whenever we couldn't observe the 2 meter separation for periods of time, we had someone standing back observing and ensuring that safety and people were being protected, and we're still operating that concept. We have risk assessments for entering customers' premises. I say we do need to go in on occasions for faults and things like that, and we have quite a obviously guidance we need to issue staff in relation to PPE and procedures whenever we're going in and leaving staff our customers' premises. We try to operate a one person, one vehicle system as well, although obviously we were under pressure in relation to the number of vehicles we had, but we have a good relationship with our provider, and we were able to get quite a significant number of additional vehicles into the fleet to try to keep that one person, one vehicle. There were occasions where some of our larger vehicles for teams that wasn't possible, and we issued guidelines in terms of whenever people had to travel for short distances in shared vehicles. Again, like most people, we've issued home working guidance, and also we've now issued return to office guidance. And make people see behind me, this office is a bit like a crime scene. It used to hold about 20 people. It's now a maximum of 6. and we've got everything demarked right across all of our premises in terms of maximum occupancy in offices, getting ready for that return, which hasn't started as yet. We took precaution in terms of control centres, very critical part of our operations, and we have a backup control centre which we mobilised, and we still have the control function operating from 2 different locations, just to stop, to minimise the amount of person-to-person contact in terms of handovers, etc. And I even tested our emergency plan for storms during a period. We had a storm on the 22nd of May, and we had to mobilise some of our local incident centres, and we were able to test that mobilisation with social distancing in place at the same time. So other things, governance, very quickly, apart from our executive team meeting daily on this, we formed our pandemic plan has the formation of a crisis management team, and that meets every day. And I'm on that also. It sort of looks at the day-to-day management in terms of ensuring that we have the right documentation out, we have the right PPE, with the right regimes around offices, supplies, dealing with our own supplier, the supply chain. We have HR in there in terms of health and well-being programs, and our IT people in terms of all the IT support, and probably the additional close to 500 laptops we had to get from our IT provider to allow home working. And in addition to that, I actually ran a contingency planning group, which really was looking at the organisational capability, this sort of impact of less staff, and what would happen if we ever went to a 25% or even a 50% staff unavailability. What would be the way we would run the business, in terms of that type of impact. And we've assessed every work programme on the ground, and every office activity, every support activity has been analysed with that level of impact, so that if we ever did hit that, we've got that assessment completed. And with that sort of level of impact as well, we also assessed our ability to escalate for storms and response, and also if we got a black start event, could we mobilise with say up to a 50% reduction. And I'm glad to say for both the storms and the black start, we feel we probably could manage that effectively. So I mentioned before the alternative works group, trying to identify what sort of almost fill-in work we can do for staff. And we had a community response group. We'd also people out in community, helping with that aid that was so badly needed. And also a contingency succession plan down to an N-2 situation for key roles was determined as well. In terms of finance, I can't go probably too much into the actual figures in this, but hopefully this will give you an idea. We did maintain full employment, and we did maintain full pay for staff during the period. And we had obviously our own business continuity arrangements kicked in relation to purchase of materials and relationship with suppliers. And I'm glad to say we've been very successful in terms of making sure that critical materials, a lot of stuff we buy from Europe, we had good supply lines during the worst periods. And we've taken opportunities obviously to look for cost reduction savings, and we've stood down the majority of our contractors during this period. In terms of the main impacts, reduction in capital investment has an impact on the business. However, it's only really a short-term thing. We see that although we did stop a lot of our asset replacement programs and our development programs, we believe that we will be able to recover that in the final years of this regulatory period, which runs till 2024. So although there was an in-year impact, we do believe that it is possible for us to ramp up and potentially increase the use of contractors and support to recover any lost ground that we made in relation to those programs. In terms of connections activity, obviously, anybody who's doing new builds or whatever has probably, didn't do an awful lot of activity during that period. At one point in time, I think the worst period, we were down to 10% of normal activity and connections, but that has now increased, and I think we're back up over 50, around about 50-60% of normal, applications for new connections. We have reduced income due to the ability to carry out our meter reading and our meter research, our recertification programs, which is our effectively asset replacement of metering assets. And also because of the volumetric reduction in usage of electricity, you know, a lot of our recovery of our costs is through a thing called a DUOS charge, it's a distribution use of system charge, which is actually part of people's bills. And because it's usually volumetric calculated, so it does mean that this particular year we're going to have a shortfall in terms of recovery because of that 15% less utilization of electricity. You know, and that will have to be something we you know, discuss with our regulator in terms of how we recover that in the future. From a health and safety point of view, then, just quickly, you know, we have covered some of this. Staff absence range from about 1% currently to about 8.5% at the peak. 50% people working at home. I've talked about PPE and hygiene protections being deployed, social distancing, the protocols for under 2 meters. We have COVID testing, obviously, as key workers. We have the ability to provide tests, and we procure testing for our staff if required. And you know, we have good discussions and agreement with the trade unions all the way through this, you know, in terms of the essential work programs and all the safety protocols we had to introduce. And we've been communicating on a regular basis, nearly on a daily basis, with the staff in relation to the plans as they evolve. Moving on, just conscious of time here. You know, in terms of the customer piece, you know, in terms of protecting customers, you know, we had to make sure that any sort of intrusion into customers' premises was minimised. So with things like meter reading, only done really where we had external meter cabinets that we didn't have to cross the thresholds of houses. We had a protocol for entering houses developed, you know, for the times we did have to enter premises for faults, etc. We had, you know, the planned outages were only really for essential works, you know, so minimising the amount of time people were taking off supply. Protecting vulnerable customers, we had you know, major program of contacting and keeping in regular touch with vulnerable customers. Enhancing resilience at hospitals and critical sites. So there's a lot of work done around those premises to ensure that the network is robust. You know, and any defects that were in those particular areas and that supply part of the network were dealt with. And good sort of support and communications with MLAs and also a good PR and stakeholder engagement program has been running alongside this. I just want to finish then with the green recovery. I mentioned about the green recovery. I'm not sure if some people may be aware of a report that came out on May the 4th, just that one on the blue in the bottom there. It's done by the Smith School of Economics in Oxford. And they showed this sort of chart on another webinar I was on at one stage, and I thought this was very, very interesting, that they've tried to look at activities that will stimulate the economy, and which is along the sort of the x-axis there, and also on the y-axis you've got sort of your climate change agenda. So you know, they were looking at the different types of activities, and this is right across Europe. You know, in terms of the types of investment that hit both of those both axes. So it's really the top right-hand box are the activities which have got very, very positive effect in terms of an economic multiplier, but also are hitting our green agenda in relation to climate change. And you know, I think both the Republic of Ireland have now got a very, you know, they've got a climate action plan that has been legislated for. In Northern Ireland, we're working on a new framework with the Department for the Economy. There's a new strategic energy framework to be published at the end of next year, and obviously we've got the backdrop of the net zero legislation in the UK. So you know, things that are in the top right hand box are things like connectivity infrastructure. You know, you've got your whole digital area, clean energy infrastructure, so that's your whole renewables piece, and the whole low carbon technology uptake. And then you've got clean energy and R&D spending, and then in there a number down the bottom there was building efficiency, so things like retrofit programs, you know, for so it's there's this is a sort of, I think it was quite a powerful message in terms of the, you know, where that is for us. And you know, we're on a pathway to change the way that the network was traditionally designed, maintained and operated. You know, we're going back to where we were, you know, back in the 80s. The old world was basically, you know, MIE space was there between the power stations and the meter effectively, and it was generally a one-way flow of power, you know, and you know, there was the odd wind farm, you know, popping up, but it was generally a unidirectional type of flow. And where we're moving to now in this new world is it's pretty much bi-directional. The little chart down in the bottom right, the map of Northern Ireland, we call the measles chart. It's all the sort of the wind farm locations or wind turbine locations in Northern Ireland, which now account for over 23,000 locations. Back in the 80s, we only had 3 power stations. We've now got over 23,000. And it's a combination. See, we're seeing the power flow generally coming both ways on the network now. From a lot of the wind is out in the west of the province, and that's where a lot of the generation is connected. And obviously that's where the network was probably less, stronger, weaker in terms of the capacity, because most of the power stations were located in the east and we were pushing power east to west. Now it's the other way around. So there's a real challenge for us in terms of managing that asset and developing it to ensure that we can accommodate the increased renewables. The net zero legislation, the energy strategy that has been launched by the DFE are all big drivers in the new decade-year approach, which does have the energy strategy as fourth on the agenda. In terms of the programme for government, are all key drivers for us. And of particular importance, just for us as the final slide, for where we're looking in terms of this green recovery, the impact in the network that we're now looking at is through things like these are probably sort of 7 key areas for us. Is the whole area of buildings, to align back to this programme that the Oxford analysis. Energy efficiency and retrofit programs are going to be massive. Smart metering. We are probably one of the only countries in Western Europe that hasn't yet got a smart metering program, and we certainly saw the impact of that during COVID, where we weren't able to get in and read meters, and that had an impact in terms of billing and estimated billings, etc. Whereas if we had smart metering, that would have been sort of business as usual and normal. We would have had access to that information. Electric vehicle charging, it's getting the right market conditions, and for provision of infrastructure in Northern Ireland, and from our point of view, knowing where that's going to be, so we can ensure that the network is developed and fit for purpose to accommodate that charging network. Infrastructure delivery, getting things delivered on the ground, across the local councils where the planning is devolved to. We want to make sure that it's coordinated and that's consistent as well in terms of allowing the volume of renewables that needs to connect in the future. And we estimate that almost would be required to double if we're going to hit even a 70% renewable target by 2030. Tariff reform, as I said, like a lot of the tariff is based on volume. A lot of new customers coming on are going to be self-generating, and their volume that is drawn off the network is going to be much reduced, and therefore, people who aren't active in the new world are probably, there's a possibility that those customers are maybe going to take a larger proportion of the share of costs of the network if that isn't rectified. So we're looking for tariff reform. Connection charging, we're slightly out of step with the Republic of Ireland GB in relation to what's charged to a connecting party and what is socialised, through the bill. And again, we were looking for a review on that. And then there's just a piece around governance, with the departments in relation to there's a central ownership of this whole recovery plan, and also the customers are provided with independent advice. But the impact of all this is for us in terms of how we manage and develop the asset base is very significant, into the future, because this is a continually evolving. It's a completely different use of the network than it was in the past. And a part of our role is to ensure that we invest ahead of need, and the network is there ahead of the demand, so that we don't become a blocker in this transition, towards a net zero future. So that's everything from me. Hopefully that was of some interest. I'll hand back to Orla.
That was great, Randall. We actually have one question from our audience. Just on the piece that you mentioned, how well did people respond to new controls and procedures, especially on the use of vehicles?
Yeah, I think the general answer to that is we didn't have any significant problems. The procedures, because we had, I mentioned about the crisis management team, the CMT. It met every single morning in relation to development of these procedures. And before that CMT meeting, there was an hour with the unions on exactly the same agenda. So the union were kept involved and engaged right throughout this process, and were actually instrumental in helping us develop those procedures, you know, from the staff's any staff concern issues. So, you know, it was a combination of that, working with the staff, working with the unions, and obviously very much being led by the Northern Ireland executive guidance that was coming out at the time, which was also somewhat slightly different than what was coming from GB and on the news. So we had to work within the NIA executive guidance. But the fact that we tried as much as possible to get people into single vehicles, you know, we looked at vehicle share, we looked at screens down the middle, you know, but our supplier of vehicles was rightly concerned about, you know, although they could retrofit and put barriers into vehicles and everything else, there was real concerns about, you know, insurance and, you know, whether that was actually going to impede some safety considerations, you know, if there was accidents, and trying to get people, you know, in and out of vehicles, and did it even in terms of deployment of airbags, you know, they just weren't keen on retrofitting vehicles to put barriers in. We did some benchmarking with things like the police force, the PSNI, who are sharing vehicles on a daily basis, and you know, they didn't go down the route of trying to put barriers and approach, but through a very comprehensive cleaning regime, applying, you know, PPE, minimizing journeys, ensuring the teams were consistent. You know, it wasn't being changed every day. That, you know, if 2 people were sharing a vehicle, that was it, you know, for the week. You know, we were able to you know, get good buy-in.
Brilliant. Okay, that sounds great. And then there's one other question, which is, were your continuity figures affected by stopping your timber cutting programs?
When I presume the continuity, you meaning sort of continuity supply, and probably the answer to that is no, because the tree cutting, the tree cutting that we were doing in relation to resilience, really the impact of trees only really comes through poor weather, and we were fortunate. Obviously, we've probably had some, you know, probably the best 3 months we've had in a long time, you know, in Northern Ireland during this. So the halt of that tree cutting program, we haven't had the bad weather, and B, you know, it only really impacts during the autumn and winter months. So as we come out of this now and we start to get back to normal, we will be increasing that tree cutting program. Obviously, it's been good growth. We'll be increasing that, you know, as we get into the autumn and winter, to ensure that, you know, that resilience cut is restarted, and hopefully doesn't impact down the line.
Perfect. Okay, thanks a million. That was great. If we change back over, we'll move on to the panel section, and no doubt there'll be more questions for yourself, Randall. If that's okay. Screen. Okay, so the panel discussion we're going to run today, hopefully everyone can see my screen properly. We've got 3 great representatives here as part of our panel, as Matt mentioned earlier. So we have Randall from Northern Ireland Electric, we've got Cathal McCarthy from GNI, and we have Tom Brown from ESB Generation. Cathal, like Randall, hopefully everyone's familiar with you now, but Cathal or Tom, would you like to do a quick introduction? Oh, I think you're on mute, Cathal. Uh-oh, sorry.
Can you hear me, Orla?
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
Orla, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. Okay, so yeah, Cathal McCarthy, Gas Networks Ireland. I was supposed to be part of a double act from GNI, in that I was supposed to have our asset strategy manager with me. So apologies to everyone in advance. I'm neither an IAM person nor an engineer, which is probably a double offence to many of you. But I was going to speak around. I have been coordinating the restart. So as we shut our work down in Gas Networks Ireland for the lockdown, we started looking early on about how we were going to get back up and what our roadmap to recovery was going to be. So I can provide some perspective on that as we get into the panel discussion.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And Tom, do you want to say a quick few words?
Yeah, can you hear me, Orla?
I can, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, my name is Tom Brown. I'm Generation Engineering Manager with ESB. So would be involved in a lot of the major works that we do on our generating plant. And look, happy to talk about the effect of COVID-19 on the ESB generation operations over the course of the next half an hour or so.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Tom. So we're going to try running a live poll. So we've got a series of 5 questions that we'll ask first of all to the audience, and then we'll hand over to the panel to give us some insights. So hopefully people will be able to see my screen now, or they should be able to see a poll. Now, can you see a poll of a question?
Was there all
Did see it for a minute.
Okay, we've
It
got
was there,
some
Orla,
people.
but it's back to the panel discussion slide.
Okay, I'll try that again.
There
How's
now.
that? Brilliant, thank you. Okay, just give it a second there. Are people viewing poll results?
Yep.
No,
Yep.
okay. Well, let's kick off with this question, and hopefully it'll work better on the second. Apologies, I think that was my fault. So what we're asking is, what has the effect? Sorry, what has the effect of COVID-19 had on the demand of your product or service? So if we can, will we kick off with yourself, Cathal? Can you see a large impact on G&I since COVID kicked off in April?
Yeah, so I'd echo an awful lot of what Randall said. I guess when we first went into lockdown, the weather was still relatively cold, and a lot of people were working from home, and they had the heating on during the day. So although we saw a drop off in gas demand for business, it was offset pretty much by a rise in domestic demand. And then as the weather got a bit better, we saw, obviously businesses were still not using as much, but we saw wind being very much absent from the Irish weather scenario, because we had unbelievably good weather for the last 3 months. So gas demand was actually pretty high for electricity generation, and there were a number of days where gas was supplying over 75% of Ireland's electricity. So from a raw gas demand perspective, the impact hasn't been that great or that adverse. But we did see, a little like Randall was saying, a complete drop off in new connection requests. People were obviously not thinking about changing their fuel source in their house or moving house or anything like that. We did, and although it's not particularly demand related, we were prioritising healthcare services and anybody who was required gas for frontline services. So we kept all of our maintenance staff going and all of our critical maintenance on board. So that has meant that as we've seen recovery, there hasn't been that dramatic a difference for us in terms of our working day. The majority of staff are working from home and will continue to do so, but those critical people continue to work right throughout the crisis.
Okay, and then Tom, I appreciate you'll be coming from an ESB generation side of things. So, did you see much impact on the actual operation of the plants, or was it more on the other side?
In terms of the operation of the plants, I suppose just the first thing to say that there has been a general reduction in electricity demand, over the period of April and May. It's probably down around 10, 11, 12%. It's recovering now, but I think that while just to echo what Cathal says, domestic demand probably has gone up. SME demand has probably fallen a bit, although again, to echo Randall's comments, meters weren't really being read over the period of time, so it's probably difficult to get a totally accurate figure on that. I think in terms of large industrial demand, it's probably generally held reasonably steady. There's a lot of data firms, pharmaceutical companies on the island of Ireland which continue to operate. So obviously demand in those areas didn't fall. I think in terms of the peaks, the kind of peaks that would have been familiar, the morning peak and the evening peak, they have certainly changed. The morning peak in particular, I suppose because of the change in people's working habits and that, there's probably been about an 800 megawatt reduction in the size of the morning peak over the past couple of months. And that then, I suppose, has had a knock-on effect in terms of the generation plants and the amount of electricity that's been produced by them. I suppose one of the interesting things that's happened, and particularly in periods of high wind, now we haven't actually had that much high wind periods in April and May, but we did have some there towards the end of May, and I mean, it was noticeable the effect of significant amount of wind generation on, if you like, reducing the gas consumption for those periods. In fact, you know, at times the wind generation was producing certainly well over 70% of the supply, and you know, it was noticeable that in that perspective. So look, what we have seen generally is a general reduction in the volume of electricity that's been sold. The system, though, is working well. I mean, I don't think we've kind of seen any problems with the systems in terms of how they've worked. The actual operation of the generation plant has, broadly speaking, continued as normal. But the big area where we have probably seen a difference is that where we have had large shutdowns and large overhauls of plants planned for quarter two, early quarter three period of the year. I mean, some of them had to be postponed or pushed back into the latter parts of the year because of the availability of contractors and issues around social distancing and all that type of thing. So that's probably been the biggest effect for us is being large work and the way they've had to be rescheduled as a result of the COVID-19 crisis.
Okay, and that sounds like it resonates with you as well, Randall, where your work's dropped really across May, and then has slowly been coming back up to your previous levels. Yeah.
Yeah, I think really it's as I mentioned in terms of the product. I mean, the demand obviously is one thing, and that was about 15% or so. Connections, I've just managed to check, and we're seeing good recovery there. We're almost now, in terms of this current week, back to our pre-COVID levels of connection applications. So that's a good indication that people are starting to, you know, emerge out of this and starting to think about, you know, if there were, I think maybe over the months, maybe where there have been thoughts and plans, it's now turning back into, I must get the application in. So I think we're starting to see good recovery there.
Great. Okay, that's really reassuring. And from, I know we didn't get everyone quite to vote on that, but it looks like the people who did vote, significant change in demand. So it sounds similar, that everyone's having a similar experience on that front. Okay, we'll move on to the next question if we can. Liam, I might need some help. Okay, hang on. Actually, I think we're okay. Okay, so our next question, I think we've kind of covered it, but I'll put it up for the audience. So the question is, did you see changes in demand being permanent? No, okay. Okay. Okay, I think we'll stop it there. That's got a good few people. So it looks like, although Randall, it's great that you're seeing things bounce back and the connections recovering. It looks like a lot of people are saying that they're not yet clear on whether the changes will be permanent or not. Are there other aspects of your business that, the changes that you've seen, you're still not sure actually what's going to happen and will they fully recover?
Yeah, I think demand definitely. I don't see it being permanent, but it does raise another interesting question, and it's maybe something for the future consideration. But I think it'd be interesting. Certainly we don't believe we're going back to normal business the way we were before. We've instigated a piece of work now right across our business to capture the COVID learning in terms of business processes, and we believe that definitely working from home is going to be an element of the future working arrangements. It's not going to be for everybody, but it's certainly going to be here to stay. We believe, I believe COVID with us for the next couple of years, and we'll have to manage that. I don't think it's going away quickly. and we have to sort of adapt to be able to cater for that. So I think demand. No, I think that will recover. I think we'll get our programs back on track, and connection activity and meter activity will all resume. But I think that there is definitely other learning to be had from this in terms of how we manage the business and how we operate in the future. I think that's almost a separate webinar at some stage, maybe. We'll see.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be an acceleration of the acceptability of working from home a bit more, just because you can see so many companies will have experienced it working well. Tom, is it similar in ESB? Like, is there a surprise at the amount of working from home, and are there then other impacts on your business that you're not clear actually how we're going to move forward?
Well, I suppose just in terms of the demand for the products first, Orla, in general, I mean, I think the recovery in that area really depends on how the economy fares out over the course of the next 12 months. How quickly it bounces back. I mean, we wouldn't really see it in the longer term that demand has been impacted hugely by this. But I think one of the things that we have probably had a slight sort of a sneak preview of what running electricity systems is going to be like when we have all this additional renewable power on the grid over the next number of years. And obviously that's going to be a big I suppose target. I mean, it's going to be a government target to achieve more renewable energy, and we've probably had a bit of a sneak preview of what it's going to be like actually running a system like that, as I say, with the way in which the demand has reduced over the course of the last 2 months. But just in terms of, so look, on the demand side, it's too early to say, but broadly speaking, we would expect that it will recover over time. I think, as Randall says, how people actually work is going to be very different. I mean, there's roughly 4,000 ESB people who are logging in remotely every day for the past 2 months. I think in some respects, the heroes of the hour from our point of view have been the people in the IT departments, because I mean, we've suddenly gone from a situation whereby everybody was coming into the office every day. Now everybody is logging in from home, and all the various issues that has posed for people with technology and broadband and all that sort of stuff have been, the IT people have been working fairly continuously on that over the last while. And I'd say the appetite for people to go back into the office 5 days a week now probably will be well dissipated, I'd imagine, by the time we do actually get back into the offices. There isn't at the moment now. I mean, with phase 2 of the opening up happening, and so some of the offices are opening up this week, but again, really only for very, very small numbers of staff who have significant issues, I suppose, with being able to work from home and that. I suppose most of us who are in our office space are probably going to be not working in the office over the summer, and will probably go back in some shape or form later on in the year. But it definitely is going to have a very long-term impact on people's view of office working. And I'm sure, as Randall says, I mean, ESB is also looking at how it should, if you like, take the experience of the last 2 months and feed it into its future ways of working and the way people will do their jobs.
Okay, yeah, and what about yourselves in GNI, Cathal? Are there those big changes you're seeing happening, or is it yet to be determined, really?
Yeah, well, I guess no different to the other two panelists. I would imagine that when we first went into this, we focused on our critical process, making sure that grid control could keep the gas flowing and that we could respond to leaks and all that. So we were really, in the first few weeks, making sure that those critical processes could operate. But we found over time that actually all our processes were operating, whether through the sheer endeavour of our people finding workarounds or just adapting quickly to these new ways of working, to the point now where and I'm speaking purely on a personal level, I could envisage 70% of our office staff never needing to go back. We've all adapted this new way of working. But I guess the original question was in relation to long-term impact on demand for our product. I would have responded, not yet clear. But I think one thing that has given us renewed focus is that I think, Ireland declared a state of emergency in relation to the environment last year. But really COVID showed us what we can actually do in an emergency. And I'm kind of paraphrasing Greta Thunberg there, like she pointed out early on, look what happens when you really see a crisis. So I think it's been a good period of reflection for Gas Networks Ireland. We've been looking at trying to bring renewable gas onto the network more strongly over the past number of months, and also to shift into using compressed natural gas in transport. And I think our focus on those is something that we'll carry more strongly forward now as a result of this learning experience.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks, William. Makes sense. Okay, brilliant. Just conscious of time, I don't think we're going to get through all the questions, and I definitely don't want to run over. And we have a couple of questions from our audience, but we will go on to our next poll question for now, and we'll see how far we get down through. Okay, so going now into a little more detail, into a little more granularity onto your day-to-day operations. And I know we covered it as part of the kind of working from home. The question is, how much have the day-to-day operations of your assets been disrupted by COVID-19? So I've just launched the question, so hopefully we'll get a few votes back. Okay, we're up around the 50%, so let's start having a chat about this. Okay, so it's interesting to see the results there. Actually, I'll close the poll. Sorry, to see the results that actually 58% of people have said that COVID has actually had a little impact on their day-to-day operation. Like, is that something that comes as a surprise, I think, as a starter? And then if you can give us an insight into what are the day-to-day operations other than the working from home and the things that you've mentioned. Carl, do you want to kick off with that one? Like, are you surprised to see that answer, and does it really reflect in how GNI see this as well?
And I guess I'm not surprised really, because I got a pleasant surprise early on in the lockdown in that we were able to maintain all of our day-to-day operations on our assets. And I suppose we would break our assets into two broad classes: our transmission ones, which are high pressure, high value, great potential for interruption if anything goes wrong with them, and our distribution assets, which are higher volume, lower value. The transmission assets are typically in remote-ish locations, and our staff were able to continue working on those and doing all of our maintenance on those. And I guess that was probably essential for the island of Ireland for security of supply and keeping gas flow into the country. And so it was it hasn't been a surprise that we've been able to maintain it, but I guess initially, we had all our business continuity plans in place for such a scenario. Security of supply planning is something that we do. So I guess we were pleasantly surprised to see that it worked so well, would be the short answer. Yeah,
absolutely. Tom, does that resonate with yourselves in ESB?
It does, yeah. I mean, the power stations have continued to operate as normal, albeit as I mentioned before, with reduced volume output. Obviously, in terms of the working arrangements in the power stations, I mean, we've been very conscious of the fact that because workers there would be seen as critical workers, we have to, put in place working arrangements such as to minimize interaction between staff. So we sort of changed to 2 days in, shift, moving to 3 by 12-hour shifts for people, minimizing contact at shift changeover. People who could work from home did work from home. There were very strict hygiene protocols around people actually coming into the stations if they needed to do essential work there. As I said, a lot of our larger work was being postponed, so we're going to have to start looking at catching up on that now. But and as I said, that's probably the main disruption. In terms of new sites, obviously with new sites being closed down over the few months, that's obviously been a feature in terms of any new builds or new construction that we had on the cards. But to be honest, I mean, the main things that were affected there were probably site survey work on that, because we don't actually have any significant new builds happening in the generation area right at this minute. So yeah, that's probably been the main effect on us. But look, I think broadly speaking, we've been pleasantly surprised at how everything has, broadly speaking, worked. Things like remote meetings and everything have generally worked really well. People are saying, well, why would I be traveling to a meeting anymore, type of thing, because it can all be done remotely now. So look, some of those I'd say will be long-term gains that people have from this.
Yeah, absolutely. And Randall, I know you kind of spoke about it already, but is there anything you want to add just on the day-to-day operations?
I would say just, yeah, I mean, if I take us back to the assets, which, to me, the question there about the day-to-day operation of the assets. So if I was looking at the asset being the electricity network and the assets that make up the network, ironically, probably the performance of the network has improved over this period, because we measure the network performance in terms of a measure called customer minutes lost. It's a reflection on when the amount of time the network was unavailable. And there's two elements to it. One's on fault, and the other's on planned operations. And the fact that we have reduced our planned operations has had a positive impact in terms of network availability, and also the good weather has also had a positive effect. So in terms of our network performance statistics, we're probably actually better than where we had anticipated being by nearly 30%. So I think from a purely operational point of the asset base, we've actually seen a marked improvement. Ironically.
Brilliant. Okay. I'm conscious we're running out of time rapidly. We had another question that we wanted to talk about, looking at capital investment, but actually we've had a question in from the audience on that. So I might just ask that quickly, and then we'll do a wrap up. This came in a question basically talking about capital plans, and I know, Randall, you mentioned, I think Tom, you mentioned your capital plan as well, and Randall, you mentioned how although there's been a reduction in spending over this period on capital works, the plan is still to deliver the full 2024 plan. And the question really is, how are you planning on doing this? And will the overall green initiative kind of feed into that replanning process?
Yeah, good question. In terms of how we intend to get back on target, I sort of alluded to the fact that, yeah, we probably are going to look at some form of ramp-up program. The fact that we've got till March 2024 to achieve our outputs, which are measurable, they're quantifiable, I think gives us a chance to sort of glide path that. And we have good contractor support, and we have other ways that we're looking at recovering that. So look, I'm confident, and the work we've done in terms of rebalancing and replanning and shaping the next number of years, I think we'll catch up the few months that we've lost. I think in terms of the green recovery, absolutely. We've done some prediction work in terms of the uptake of low carbon technologies, and I mean things like PV cells, and we're seeing a big increase in terms of the uptake of solar PV and domestic, and even in farms, solar farms, electric vehicles. We're starting to see that impact. Battery storage, renewables are still. It looks like the target for renewables is going to be set. We had a 40% target by 2020, which we beat. We got 44% by 2019 in Northern Ireland. That's consumption from renewables. It looks like the target's moving towards 70% plus for 2030. So there will be another renewable program over the next 10 years. So like the whole green agenda is advancing. So will that impact soon? Those items that I had on the final slide really are the areas we see we need to move on now. I think the new strategic energy framework for Northern Ireland probably won't be signed off until November 21, I think is the current target. But we're certainly seeing that there's areas we need to move on immediately, and we're having discussions, with the politicians in relation to trying to get some movement on the ground to get policies moving. That will start this recovery. Yeah, we have another recast with the regulator for another sort of estimate in terms of the needs from between now, from 2021 to 2024, in terms of the impact on the network in relation to reinforcement of the grid to accommodate this, and we're working at that at the minute. So the whole low carbon agenda and the low carbon impact in terms of the network is very much front and center of where we're now evolving the network, and how it's going to be operated. Customer behaviours will change. The time of day of usage of electricity, I think, will change, and we just need to ensure that we're ahead of the game and ahead of the curve, so that we can anticipate and provide a network that is going to accommodate this transition.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks very much. And then Tom, I mean, amazing that you feel like you've kind of had a preview of how the system could run more reliant on renewables. But in terms of your capital investment, I mean, has there been a similar experience to NIE, and do you think there'll be any acceleration, or how will that capital work be recovered over the coming months and years?
Well, look, in terms of things like major refurbishments of our existing plants, I mean, we're rescheduling some of those shutdowns at the moment. Obviously, we have to work closely with EirGrid in terms of what suits them from a grid security perspective, etc., etc. So there's work that we would hope will take place in Q3 that may have been originally planned for earlier. Some work is probably even likely to go into 2021. And we're sort of conscious as well in doing that a lot of the, I suppose the OEMs, the contractors who carry out these works, I mean, they're probably going to be in demand generally within the industry, not just in Ireland, but in Europe. And there'll be a lot of call in their time. So that's something that we're going to have to, that's a challenge that we're going to have to work with, I think, over the next 12 months as we catch up on our refurbishment programs. In terms of new works, we're looking at ESB has been, as part of its broader strategy, is intending to get more into renewables anyway over the next over the decade. We're getting into offshore wind at the moment. There's the renewable auction is coming up now in July. We're going to be involved in that. And again, so I mean, I think our move towards renewables will continue. Obviously, things like the financial aspects of it, and how they're impacted by the current crisis and stuff, I'm sure will be reviewed by the relevant people in the company. But broadly speaking, I think we're very much on track towards a more renewable generation portfolio anyway over the course of the next 4 years.
Brilliant, thanks. And Pavel, is there anything you want to add in there from your side?
Yeah, just for some of our larger civil projects, where you're digging a big hole in the ground and spending a lot of money on it, we've probably been very lucky with the timing in that we would typically aim for those to be seasonal summer works. Ideally, we would have started them in kind of late April, early May, but what we did in the time that we were locked down was get everything ready that we could, all the prerequisites, so that construction could hit the ground May 18th once things opened up. Obviously, there may be a sting at the tail end of that, in that some works might start slipping into autumn months and winter months. But right now, we're not looking at any of our large volume or our large value programs slipping. And then on our kind of high volume distribution type programs, where you're replacing thousands of meters in a given month, those have obviously been affected, and we're just going to have to look at ways that we can catch up on those. We're not too sure yet. We need to work through that.
Fair, that's understandable. Okay, that's brilliant. I'm conscious we've gone over time, so I think we'll stop at the questions there, and we'll just move on and just wrap up. I think really interesting discussion, and the fact that we've run over, I think, really speaks to the topic. I mean, the impact on businesses is unprecedented, and it really sounds like definitely from the experience across NIE, GNI and ESB, that things are recovering quite quickly, and that processes for contingency planning and all that really have seemed to stand up and work for companies, which is great. As Matt mentioned at the start of this, we're running a series of these. So the next event, what it's going to cover, I know there was one question on apprenticeships and apprenticeship schemes. So we will look into running an event that will answer that question as well. And just keep an eye on your email. We haven't confirmed exactly the date that we're going to have this event, but if you keep an eye, you'll get the invite, and please, we really encourage you to sign up. And also, we'd really like to get any feedback. So if you have any feedback on this event, or if you really have a topic that you think that we should cover. Also, if you're happy to be a speaker and join us on a panel, we'd really appreciate, just reach out to myself, Orla, or anyone on the committee, and we'd be more than happy to link you in. And so finally, just to say a massive thank you to our panelists. I appreciate you taking the time out. I know the working world is different and busy at the moment, so really do appreciate you taking the time. And to everyone who joined the call, great to have you involved, and please continue to support us as the IAM chapter in Ireland. Okay.
Thanks. Oh. Thank you, Orla.
Right.
Very much.
Okay. Thanks very much. Speak to you soon.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.
Talk soon.